Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you decided to stop in and check out the latest response video. This one to some YouTuber who goes by the name of JaclynGlenn. Now, I think I've actually seen her videos out there before, and this is before I started doing these response videos. And as people have been saying, hey, you need to do more of these response videos, and they need to be shorter. Quit with the hour and 44 minute or 2 hour videos. I thought this could be a good experiment. I know that JaclynGlenn is not one of the atheists that has spoken about me or has hung out with, so far as I know, the people that have made videos about me or who I have debated. But she's got 763,000 YouTube subscribers, which means she's probably making an impact with somebody in terms of their thinking. And for those of you that think, well, yeah, but these arguments she's going to give, and this speaks not at all of whether or not she is capable of giving good arguments or is otherwise very intelligent, learned person. That's not the point. This video is kind of more of a bunch of cliches and bumper stickers and things like that. So in that regard, and only in that regard, you might say, yeah, but Braxton, this is just kind of like going after the low-hanging fruit. I mean, you just got done doing response videos to Rationality Rules, Cosmic Skeptic, and Matt Dillahunty. So, I mean, surely this isn't the kind of thing you want to spend your time doing. But in actuality, it is, because as I reiterated in each response video, my goal is not merely to go after these philosophically trained professors at universities or something. I am an evangelist, and I want to reach the people that are watching videos like this, because these are the kind of people that, though they would probably never phrase it this way, I consider to be evangelists for atheism. And so a pithy, cliche-ridden video like this can make a big impact, because one of the things that you've seen as a theme as we've been talking through these response videos is that rhetoric and mockery is powerful in terms of persuasion. You've also heard me say there's nothing wrong with either rhetoric or mockery on occasion, but it can't be the bulk of what you're saying. It can't be all you're doing. And there's very little in terms of substantive argumentation in this video. It's mostly rhetoric and mockery. And I don't say that as a slight to JaclynGlenn. That's probably what she was going for. I have nothing but the best wishes for her, and I hope that she will come to Christ, and not because I think I'm so incredible that I found the one true way and you guys didn't, but because, like everyone else, I don't have the answers, and I need someone to help me because this life is going to end one day. And I need a father. I need a relationship with the creator of the universe. If that's true, I want to know what the truth is, and I want to worship him. And I don't have those answers, but I found Jesus, and it's him. He's got those answers. I'm no better than any of you. That's not the point here. It's not. I think oftentimes Christians are, it's kind of like, yeah, you guys are so arrogant. You think you got the corner on the truth. No, and if Christians come off that way, I apologize on their behalf. The point is, all of us are broken. All of us have failed. All of us are imperfect, and we can't find these answers. We don't have the way to help you. We can't help you in your situation, but he can, because he helped me. That's the point. The point here is evangelism and seeing people come to Christ. That's my goal for you. And Jaclyn, if you see this, just know that none of this is said in spite. This is said out of respect for the impact you're having out there, the degree to which you're having that kind of an impact on YouTube. And I feel like the other side needs to be represented. So let's jump in and let's see what she says. And I'll make my comments as we go along.
Hey guys, so CNN recently posted and tweeted this. The Big Bang breakthrough rocked the science world. See how it could also support biblical beliefs. But I don't know, if anything counts as proof, this might as well too. I took my mom's dog for a walk this morning, and he took a like right away.
Okay, now she's going to list off a number of things that she thinks, and this is the mockery, this is the rhetoric, I always point it out. But the point of this mockery and rhetoric is to show that she could point to the most absurd imaginable things, and some religious person might take that as some kind of an argument for God's existence, or it could be used as a part of an argument for God's existence. And in that regard, I have to say, she wouldn't expect me to, but I actually agree with her. She thinks she's using hyperbole. I don't think she is. At least she's trying to, but I accept the hyperbole, and I'll take it all the way to its conclusion. So, for example, her dog defecating. Is that something that could be used as a part of an evidence or argumentation for God's existence? I think that it can. Why can it? Well, because you have biological living beings like a dog and a system in that dog that seems intelligently designed that allows for something like defecation, which is good for the dog. You have found companionship in that dog, and you are an incredibly complex system. At least your physical body is an incredibly complex system that allows for things like vision, and you can observe and appreciate your dog as your dog defecates all over the place, evidencing the existence of God. How is that an evidence for God's existence? Doesn't evolution solve all of that? I don't think so. Even if one takes evolution to be the case, the fact of the matter is that everything had to be just right in the universe and on our planet in order for life to even be possible. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross makes this point. Take, for example, the balance necessary between electrons and protons. Now, there are a lot of things that have to be just right in order for life to even be possible, whether you take evolution or anything else. There are a number of things that have to be absolutely just right in order for life to even be possible on this planet or in this universe. Let's just take that down to one thing. Let's just narrow that down to one specific thing: the balance of electrons and protons that are necessary in our physical universe. So this alone necessitates an accuracy of 1 in 10 to the 37th power. Now, astrophysicist Hugh Ross eloquently describes the chances of this occurring without design thusly. Quote, 1 part in 10 to the 37th power is such an incredibly sensitive balance that it is hard to visualize. The following analogy might help. Cover the entire North American continent in dimes all the way up to the moon, a height of about 239,000 miles. In comparison, the money to pay for the U.S. federal government debt would cover 1 square mile less than 2 feet deep with dimes. Next, pile dimes from here to the moon on 1 million other continents the same size as North America. Paint 1 dime red. And mix it into the billion piles of dimes. Blindfold a friend and ask him to pick out 1 dime. The odds that he will pick the red dime are 1 in 10 to the 37th power, and this is only one of the parameters that is so delicately balanced to allow life to form. That is from Hugh Ross's The Creator and the Cosmos, 2001, 3rd edition, page 150. So you can see that that is just one of many variables that has to be absolutely just right for life to be possible. Now, you have 3 options when it comes to this level of seeming design, this fine-tuning of the universe to allow life to be possible. It could be due to chance, but we've just seen how that seems absurd. It could be due to necessity, and if it's due to necessity, that would mean that there just literally was no other way it could be. The universe couldn't have gone any other way, but physicists overwhelmingly reject that. Or it could be intelligent design. The most reasonable of these conclusions is intelligent design. And so can your defecating dog serve as good evidence for the existence of God? He certainly can, or she, I don't know. But that could serve as incredible evidence for the existence of God based on a design argument. People have tried to get around the design argument because they have posited a multiverse. And in case Christian apologists are not aware of this, and many atheists probably won't be aware of this, but one of the benefits of there being a multiverse for science is that if there exists a multiverse with an infinite or seemingly infinite number of other universes, then the more universes you have, especially if there is an actual infinite number of other universes, which I've argued elsewhere is impossible, then you would get a universe that's life permitting, no matter how incredibly unlikely that is. Just randomly, given enough time, you would. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no good reason to believe that a multiverse exists. And even if you did somehow demonstrate that a multiverse exists, you would still have all the work ahead of you when it comes to the cosmological argument. If you want to see why that wouldn't work why that would still work on a multiverse system, then go check out my video aimed at rationality rules, cosmic skeptic, and Matt Dillahunty. So yes, your defecating dog would serve as great evidence for God's existence.
Proof. I have a website with awesome t-shirts. Proof.
You have a website with awesome t-shirts. Well, let's see about that. Obviously, again, she's picked this because it seems silly and no one would ever think of using that as part of an argument for God's existence, except for the fact that in order to have this t-shirt, the only purpose for a t-shirt website like this would be because people really enjoy wearing cool t-shirts. One of the reasons they might enjoy wearing cool t-shirts is because they have a sense of style. They understand beauty. They also have qualia, that is a raw experience of the external world. They enjoy looking at colors. They recognize that. And so all of this seems to rest on something immaterial. or at the very least, something to do with consciousness and identity. So let's talk for just a moment about consciousness and identity. By the way, this is not one of the arguments that I typically use, but it's there. If you'd like to study more on it, you could check out someone like J.P. Moreland. He has an argument for God's existence using consciousness. I'm not going to argue exactly like he would here, but let's just think about this for a moment. So two things, consciousness and identity. First of all, one thing that we all seem to agree is that we have this experience that we could refer to as consciousness. We have this experience of qualia. And what I mean by that is the impression, the raw experience that we have of the physical world, of color, of what we see around us. And we're able to think about these things and have beliefs about our beliefs. Now, some people may argue that you just don't have that. That is an illusion. But if it's an illusion, who is an illusion to? Where is it an illusion? Well, it's an illusion in my conscious experience, which is self-refuting. So I seem to have this conscious experience of qualia and everything else. Now, how is this possible with merely physical structures? What does it mean to say that we are conscious? How is that reducible to what is purely physical? It doesn't seem that it is. When someone says, well, your conscious experience is reducible to brain states so that we can look at your brain under an MRI and we can tell a few trivial things like perhaps whether you're experiencing pleasure or pain. And maybe in a couple hundred more years, we'll have it mastered and we'll be able to tell you what you're thinking about with specificity by looking at your brain states or perhaps using some future technology. Well, all that's fine, except for the fact that the only way you get that data to know that when the brain lights up in this particular region, it's pain versus when it lights up in this particular region, it's pleasure. The only reason you know that is because someone reported that to you from their overriding conscious experience. It doesn't seem like this conscious experience, this Cartesian theater, this that we're describing here, it doesn't seem like that is purely physical or can be explained in terms of physical things. Some people think they have a sort of a glib certainty and they think they've figured it out. But the fact is, one thing that we can't deny is that we do seem to have this seemingly non-physical. It seems like it's something other than just the circuitry. It seems like we have that. And you could doubt that other people have a conscious experience, but you can't doubt that you have a conscious experience. The second thing I want to say about this, and these two are related, is your sense of identity. You have a sense of identity that is ongoing. You have this belief, and we all kind of assume that we are the same person, and we're not talking about in a poetic or figurative sense, that we are the same person in terms of the same identity that we were 20 years ago. And people, there's a problem with this. This is an issue. How is that the case? Well, you could say, well, we are the same person that we were 20 years ago because we have the same physical body. And on naturalism, I would think that's what you would have to say, is that we are the same person because we have the same physical body. The problem with that is that every 7 to 10 years, it's my understanding that the cells in your body cycle out and you have all new cells, which means that in at least great respect, you don't have the same physical body that you had 10 or even more 20 years ago. So if your identity is in your physical body, then we run into a real problem because that body that you have now is not the same body you previously had, which means you have been multiple persons, multiple individual persons, and each one was a real person, but they're separate persons. So it doesn't seem like that identity can merely be grounded in your physical body in that way. Some would still be naturalists and say, well, it is still on naturalism, but what it is it's your memories. You're able to maintain your identity based on your memories. So you're the same person you were yesterday and 10 years ago because you are passing on your memories. And since you remember, and they were your memories that you had 10 or 20 years ago, then your identity is preserved through the passing on of your memories. And even though other people could have memories about your experiences, they would not be your own first-person experiences. And so it seems like a fair explanation to say, yeah, you are the same person. You maintain your identity because of memories. Except for the fact that if we go back far enough, you have gaps and holes in your memories. You don't remember everything perfectly. And think about your earliest memory. Perhaps you were 3 or 4 years old. You don't remember anything prior to that. Does that mean you were a different person prior to your first memory? We would have to say that if this is what we're going on, that was a different person. And indeed, you may have been 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 persons in your life. And that is a big problem. So it doesn't seem like you can ground it in memory. Putting these two things together, what it seems like we could do is we could say that one way to ground your identity and explain your consciousness is to say that you are not merely a physical body, but you are a physical body and an immaterial soul. And that immaterial soul is where your identity rests and continues throughout the course of your life. And with this identity and with this soul, it would explain your consciousness. And so I've been reading a lot of Plutarch lately, and so maybe this is why I've been thinking about the ship of Theseus. Perhaps you all know about the ship of Theseus, where they wanted to preserve Theseus' ship. But it was getting old and pieces of the wood were falling off. And so what they did was they started replacing the older and rotten pieces of wood. And after given enough decades had passed, you had a completely different structure in terms of the raw materials. Not a single piece of that ship that was there when Theseus was on it, if Theseus was on it, is the ship that they had then, decades later. So the question becomes, is that the same ship or is it not the same ship? Well, some people will actually argue that it is the same ship. It's kind of like my great-great-great-great-grandfather had this. This axe has been in my family for hundreds of years. We've changed the axe head 20 times and the handle 40 times, but it's the same axe. Was it really the same axe? It's certainly not the same physical material that your great-great-great-grandfather actually held in his hand. And so in no naturalistic way does it seem like that was the same axe. Similarly, it doesn't seem like you're the same person you used to be if all the cells in your body have cycled out. And if you can't remember your memories, you don't have memories from a certain point in your past life. So it seems like the only way to really preserve this is that there's an immaterial soul. And this grounds your identity and explains your conscious experience pretty well, except for the fact that if you have a soul, then the best explanation for that is God. Why is God the best explanation for the soul? Well, first of all, it's completely consistent with theism, because if you posit theism, you already have a spaceless, timeless, non-material mind. And so we would be positing that there is a immaterial mind here for people. You have this soul. But secondly, it would make sense because on evolution, this is one of the arguments for how consciousness emerged, is that on evolution, we developed these impulses, these sort of habitual things that we do, these impulses, these pains, these warning sorts of signs that keep us away from predators, and impulses that cause us to eat and to reproduce and all these kind of things. And over time, it was good for you to feel things. And so natural selection just resulted in people that are conscious today, because those are the people that get survived the best. However, we can imagine that if you jump ahead 100, 150 years, that we could have created an android without a conscious experience that is able to survive better than human beings. Why should we assume that the being that could survive the best would need to be a being with consciousness at all? You don't take your computer to be conscious, but it performs all kinds of complex systems and avoids all kinds of problems. And so it doesn't make any sense to necessarily say that evolution would necessarily have resulted in consciousness. You just have to kind of presume naturalism in order to get to that as a poor explanation for how consciousness could be explained. But it fits well with Christian theism. So even though it's not one of the arguments that I use, the fact is you could have a good inductive. There are inductive and deductive arguments for the existence of God from conscious experience. And we saw here that our YouTube atheist has referred to her own identity because she has this T-shirt business, but also to the consciousness. She's implied it because people have qualia and appreciate beauty, and we could even have an argument from beauty there for God's existence. So there are all kinds of reasons why your T-shirt company is evidence for God. Let's keep going.
I think cats are proof that I'm Wolverine.
Now notice with this one and with the next one, I want you to see something really important here. The idea is that she's trying to say that, look, we can just point to any nonsensical thing and Christians could use it as some sort of an argument for something ridiculous. But at least with the first two, whether she meant to or not, she kind of gave us something to work with. Here, she's not even positing anything that is anywhere close to what the news story from CNN and the professor at Azusa University was paralleling. So what is the claim that CNN is making? That a number of physicists believe that we have good evidence for a cosmic beginning. And what is the person at Azusa University saying? She's saying that the Bible indicates a cosmic beginning. Are those two things somehow related? Yeah, sure they are. If it is true that the universe has a cosmic beginning, then that is consistent with the biblical account, which would mean that at least as far as the universe having a beginning, then the person at Azusa, or rather the Bible, is confirmed, at least that aspect of it, that what it said was right, that it was consistent, that it got that claim right. What about cats and Wolverine? What do those two things have to, why you having cats, how does that make you Wolverine? I don't see any kind of a causal relation or connection there at all, really. So there's no attempt at all to try to draw a good analogy or parallel there. And we're going to see that with the next point as well.
I walk through a spiderweb. Does that prove that I'm Spider-Man?
Does walking through a spiderweb prove that you're Spider-Man? Well, not unless you both happen to be a man and the spiderweb contained a radioactive arachnid that bit you, and now you can demonstrate crime-fighting Spider-Man abilities. Sorry, I encourage superhero references that accurately represent origin stories. I appreciate that sort of thing. So no, it doesn't. There's no causal connection there at all. And see, again, this is what we have. If you're going to try to parallel what you think are silly claims by Christians, then you need to at least try to do that fairly. Otherwise, what you're doing is a straw man sort of an approach. Now, it's done by analogy, but a straw man it is nonetheless. You should try to think of something that does kind of reflect, okay, there is a connection between the beginning of the cosmos, as physicists would conclude, at least according to the CNN thing, and the Bible, speaking of a cosmic beginning. There is a connection there. These last two elements you brought, there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. And so we need to just do better than that, I think. So let's go ahead and move forward with this.
So I was reading this amazing article, and I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I was reading at the bottom, the lady who wrote it, her name is Leslie Wickman, and it's giving her credentials here, and it's talking her up a little bit. She's the director of the Center for Research in Science at Azusa Pacific University. So I was kind of curious. I decided to Google the university, see what it's about. This university is a private, interdenominational, evangelical Christian university. So that explains, like, everything. So she starts off.
It explains why the person was drawing a parallel to the Bible and that they are an evangelical university, yes.
By talking about the evidence that was recently found for inflation. It's a new discovery that traces gravity waves, and it affirms scientific concepts in the fields of cosmology, general relativity, and particle physics. But then she goes on to say that the new discovery also has significant implications for the Judeo-Christian worldview, offering strong support for biblical beliefs. Why is it always a Christian God? Why isn't this evidence for Thor? And why does it have to be a God at all? Why can't it be evidence for the almighty ham and cheese sandwich? I mean,
okay, a couple of things about this. First of all, let's think about what the professor said. The professor was saying that it has implications. It confirms some of the beliefs that Judeo-Christian worshipers hold. Is that true? If it is the case that this is evidence for a cosmic beginning. Now, some of you will recall in the last episode I said that when these guys try to say that the Big Bang is not necessarily the beginning of all of space, time, and matter, because you could have multiverse, you could have a vacuum model, or whatever. When they say that, they're kind of missing the point, because the philosophical sorts of argumentation that I typically bring from the Kalam cosmological argument, saying that the Big Bang is not the beginning doesn't help you, because you still have the problem of the infinite regress of causal events and temporal moments. So it's irrelevant when people shut that down as if that stops the Kalam cosmological argument or seriously hinders it. However, if physicists don't believe in the multiverse, and they do believe that the Big Bang is somehow related to a cosmic beginning, and they see that as evidence for a cosmic beginning, is that consistent with deeply held Judeo-Christian beliefs about the cosmos? Of course it is. You say, well, yeah, but why is that evidence for the Christian God and not one of these other gods? Well, remember here, now the Christian professor did say Judeo-Christian beliefs. So let me tackle this on a couple of fronts. First of all, I want to make it clear that when people make an argument that is a theistic argument, which is the realm we're dealing in here, something like a theistic argument, whether it's the cosmological, the teleological, the ontological, the moral argument, whatever you want to do, my free will argument, these are theistic arguments. They're arguments for theism. They're just arguments for the existence of God. They're not necessarily one-stop shop. They're not at all one-stop shops for Christian theism. That's why we always, I feel like you guys are probably sick of hearing me say this. This is why we always follow it up with further argumentation, a case for the resurrection of Jesus. That's how a classical Christian apologist functions. So I hope that helps. I hope that explains something for you. That is a mistake that now I've seen on literally. Now notice now, this is the fourth or fifth video I've done like this. One was even to another Christian apologist, and what I found in every single video so far is a misunderstanding that when we're talking about a theistic argument like the Kalam, or the design argument or whatever, that we're talking about an argument for the existence of the Christian God. No, we're arguing first for general theism, that some God exists. And if you don't think that sounds pious enough and you're a Christian, understand that then we're going to follow that up with a case for the resurrection. And if you'd like a biblical model for that, then just go to Acts chapter 17 and look at how Paul begins with an argument for God's existence, one creator God, not the gods of their idols that they're worshiping. And then he talks about a case for the resurrection. And he doesn't even use a lick of scripture there. And he doesn't even mention the name of Jesus. So I hope you see there's nothing wrong with this approach. But these arguments are not arguments that are a one-stop shop for the Christian God. Now, is it true what the professor at Azusa Street said, that this does support or provide further evidence for Judeo-Christian beliefs? Yes, that is true. If you had 3 contractors, say, and for whatever reason, they're each trying to convince you that they built a cabin in the woods. Now, you've not been out there to look, but they've each claimed that there's a cabin at such and such coordinates, and they built it. Not together, but say you've got Bob and Bill and Jan. And Jan says she built it. And let's imagine for our hypothetical that Jan actually did build the cabin. The other 2 guys are lying. Bob and Bill are just lying for whatever reason. And they're all claiming to have built the cabin. And their stories of having built the cabin sound somewhat similar. All right, if you go out there and you find that there is no cabin at all, what does that tell you? Does that count as evidence against Bill having built the cabin? Yes. What about Bob? Yes. What about Jan? Yes, it would count as evidence that Jan did not build the cabin. So it's not being there does count as disconfirming evidence for each person, regardless of what we know about them otherwise, right? Okay, or all things being equal, I should say. All right, so if we go out there and we find the cabin, does that count in favor of Jan's having built the cabin? Yes. Does it also count in favor of Bill and Bob's stories if you don't know any other details? Yes, it just shows that someone built a cabin out here. And that's consistent with what Jan's saying and Bob's saying and Bill's saying. So what we would know at least is that that the cabin does exist now, right? Now we just got to figure out which of these characters built the cabin, but at least we now know that the cabin does exist, because perhaps we had previous people telling us they didn't believe in the cabin, right? Now we know the cabin exists. Now we just got to narrow it down using some other evidence to find out who really built it. Maybe we find other evidence that specifically tells us that Jan built the cabin. In the same way, this does actually count in favor of the Judeo-Christian worldview in the same way. If we had found some kind of evidence that God does not exist, that would count at least prima facie as evidence against the Judeo-Christian God, as well as all other God concepts. But if you find that there is evidence for a cosmic beginning, then this is consistent with what Christian scripture and Jewish scripture says. It may also be consistent with what other scriptures say or other gods are supposed to have done, but that doesn't mean it still doesn't count in favor of what the Judeo-Christian scriptures say, because it is consistent with what the Judeo-Christian claims were to begin with. So while it is true that we normally are just talking about theism at this point, it's also true what the professor said in that it is consistent with and does support Judeo-Christian beliefs.
I mean, to be honest, I give her credit for accepting the Big Bang Theory at all, even though it kind of destroys completely.
We need to stop real quick and say, she said, how do you know it's not evidence for this incredible ham and cheese sandwich? Well, it could be, but this is what I have come to call the pixi fallacy. Or pixi theism. You'll recall that Matt Dillahunty said, how do we know that we don't have a spaceless, timeless, non-material, sufficiently powerful pixi that serves as the best explanation for the beginning of the universe? I say, okay, I'm fine with that, but you've just described God and called God a pixi. You're now a pixi theist, but you've still affirmed theism. In the same way, let's take your ham and cheese sandwich and say that this ham and cheese sandwich, if it's going to fit the parameters of what would be necessary to have caused the physical universe to come into existence, it would have to be a spaceless, timeless, non-material, sufficiently powerful, exceedingly wise mind. And so now you've just called God a ham and cheese sandwich. You've described God and called God a ham and cheese sandwich. Welcome to theism, JaclynGlenn, you ham and cheese sandwich theist. We're going to keep adding the list. Somebody needs to make a list out there for me. We've got the computer theist, the pixie theist, and now the ham and cheese theists. But in every case, if you're going to describe this based on what would have to be true of the first cause, sans the physical universe, it would have to be a spaceless, timeless, non-material, sufficiently powerful, exceedingly wise mind. And then you can label it whatever you want. Pixie, sandwich, computer, whatever.
The whole Garden of Eden, original sin, need for a savior idea, no big deal. If the universe did indeed have a beginning,
you need to hear what she said here.
If the universe completely the whole credit for accepting the Big Bang Theory at all, even though it kind of destroys completely the whole Garden of Eden, original sin, need for a savior idea, no big deal.
Okay, now I tend to think that some, not all, but some young Earth creationists might agree with her on this, that if Big Bang cosmology is true, it completely undermines certain things in the first few chapters of Genesis. Perhaps Genesis 1 to 11. She's said Genesis 1 to 3. But here's the thing. I don't see that it's altogether clear why that's necessarily true. This is kind of like when other people, I can't remember which person it was, that said that God having free will would cause big problems for the problem of evil, a problem of suffering. And I tried to speculate about why that might be, but ultimately I wasn't given a reason. This was just kind of like this is mere rhetoric. This is the kind of thing we're talking about. Why would Big Bang cosmology necessarily indicate that the Garden of Eden didn't exist, that original sin isn't still a real thing, a real reality that we have to deal with? I'm not seeing it. I need to be told. I think what she could be saying, she could be packaging into Big Bang cosmology not only the old universe, that it's 15 to 20 billion years, and that the Earth is 4 to 5 billion years old, evolution, and because of that, the creation account as it appears in Genesis 1 and 2 seems like it's fairy tale. But see, she would need to layer on some other arguments, some other reasons to believe those things are false, because there are actually people out there who believe in the Big Bang, and some who even believe in theistic evolution. Now, I don't think those people are unchristian or anything like that. People ask me that all the time. I think it's an odd question. I disagree with certain other Christians, but wrongness does not necessarily equal lostness. And so but I know people who are Big Bang cosmologists, theistic evolutionists who still affirm all of that stuff in Genesis. But we're going to say more about Genesis here in just a moment.
If the universe did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent separate and apart from the effect that caused it. That sounds a lot like Genesis 1:1 to me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Wow, that logic was so amazing, I'm actually going to repeat it. I'm just going to replace one word. If God did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent separate and apart from the effect that caused it. Right? Why is it so?
Okay, so first of all, understand that the reason that the professor rightly said that you would need something apart from the universe that serves as the explanation for the universe is that's where we get the spaceless, timeless, non-material, sufficient, all those things that would have to be true if you subtract space, time, physical matter, and then included the things that would be necessary for something with causal powers that could produce something like a universe. I've argued for that ad nauseum in other videos, so I won't repeat that here. But it sounds like me and this professor are on the same page. Does that sound like what Genesis 1:1 says? Why, yes, it does. It's a pretty straightforward claim. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Boom. Simple claim, consistent with what we're seeing, has all kinds of implications that seem to match modern science. What's the problem? What she sees as a problem, what she wants to point out, is why couldn't you say the same thing about God? And by the way, this is one of the main reasons I wanted to do this episode, is because I get this so much. Particularly in the episode I did on Rationality Rules, Cosmic Skeptic, and Matt Dillahunty, so many people kept saying, if the universe can't be past infinite, how can your God be past infinite? Matt Dillahunty said that in the debate. How is it that your God is past infinite? Who made God? How is it God just can exist forever and doesn't need a cause? Here's the reason, is because whatever is the cause of space, time, and matter is going to be timeless. What sorts of things need beginnings and endings? Temporal things, things in time. You have to have time for beginnings and endings. So whatever the cause of the physical universe is, even if you don't think it's God, whatever you think, even if you want to say what some people say, which is, well, we don't know now, but one day maybe we will know, or maybe we'll never know, but we just don't know. Well, that's fine, but we can know some things. And what we know is it can't be spatial, temporal, or material. And that means that whatever this spaceless, timeless, non-material something is doesn't need a beginning and won't have an ending, because that is the nature of timelessness, because you have to have time for beginnings and endings. Got it? So we're not doing a case of special pleading. That's what I think she wants to say, is that this is a case of special pleading when it comes to God. We won't say this about the universe, but we will say it about God. Yes, but we know that the universe is temporal. The universe is temporal, but whatever caused the universe would have to be timeless, and timeless things don't need a beginning or ending. Does that mean it has existed forever? Well, it is true that it exists forever and from everlasting to everlasting and all that biblical language. It is true that he's existed forever, if by forever we mean as long as time has existed. The thing is, on top of that, he exists timelessly. So he has existed forever, he will exist forever, and forever is temporal language. So sans the physical universe, without forever, God still exists. He exists timelessly and would have to be the cause of the physical universe. Hope that helps for you.
So easy for religious people to ignore this blatant hypocrisy. I mean, the universe couldn't have come from nothing, but God can. And even further than that, he was just always here. He didn't have to originate from anything. He just always was.
Yeah, so as usual, I got ahead of myself, but you see that we responded to those claims.
Forget the simple logic of cause and effect thing I said like 5 seconds ago. That only applies when it's convenient for me.
Is it that it only applies when it's convenient for me, or is it the case that we have categories, temporal, non-temporal, as we just broke down a moment ago? See, it's not that the professor that she's kind of mocking doesn't know something or isn't realizing something or is being somehow hypocritical. It's that she has further stuff that she would talk to you about, like the stuff that I just laid out.
So, we know that Genesis was never intended to be a detailed scientific handbook describing how God created the universe. It imparts a theological, not a scientific message. Well, thank you for explaining that. I had no idea that the Bible wasn't a scientific handbook. Imagine how confusing messages about gravity waves and dark matter might be to ancient Hebrew readers.
Okay, she acts like it's silly that someone would have to point out that the Bible is not intended to be a science textbook. But here's the thing about that. The reason that the person probably felt the need to point that out is because, well, there's two reasons actually. One reason is because this is a fact that we seem to discover. People can testify to this. It seems like that whenever people become atheists who came from fundamentalist Christian backgrounds, and we did an episode on fundamentalism not too long ago, and I don't agree with how the word fundamentalist is used. Most of the time when we say fundamentalist, what we really just mean is a Christian who affirms the fundamentals that you have to affirm to be, in any sense, a Christian. Things like Trinitarian God, the bodily resurrection, things like this. So I don't think there's anything wrong with fundamentalism. However, throughout the 20th century, the term fundamentalism came to be associated with all kinds of other things. And so there's kind of a caricature that we all understand what she means when what anybody means when they say fundamentalist. So I've seen that when people come out of that kind of a household, real fundamentalists with a real wooden reading of Bible passages, that sort of thing. When they become atheists, they remain fundamentalist Christians when they're atheists. I don't mean they remain still in the body of Christ. I mean that when they think about Bible concepts, they still think about them the way they did when they were fundamentalist Christians. And so as a result of that, they challenge and say, well, look, obviously the universe is not merely 6,000 years old. And these other problems result when you read everything in the Bible literally, when reasonable Christians do not think that you read everything in the Bible literally. Do you read the Bible literally? Yes, when it's meant to be read literally. Not all of the Bible is to be read literally. The Bible has poetry in it. The Bible has narrative. It has apocalyptic language. The Gospels are Greco-Roman biography. There are all kinds of genres. This is a bunch of books, and we got to figure out what the genre of that book is before we decide how we're going to read it. So Genesis chapter 1 is an incredibly difficult genre to pin down. I know not every Christian listening to me is going to agree about that, but the scholarship does. The thing about it is this some sort of a literary framework where Moses was taking the falsehoods they were taught in Egypt and supplanting it with truth, but in a paradigm that they were familiar with? Is this some sort of a gap theory going on? Is this some sort of a day-age theory? Is this John Walton's sort of material versus formal creation sort of thing? There's all kinds of ways of understanding Genesis 1. I'm not saying that they're all equally valid. I'm saying there are a lot of different ways that people look at it, and a lot of different ways people have looked at it all the way back to the early church. This is not new. This is not Christians trying to find some way to accommodate science. This is a tough text to pin down the genre for and about. But when you run into most atheists, they read it in exactly the way that a very hard line creationist would, who has to take a literal reading of this text, who might say that there's something sciencey about this text. But that's to ignore the great scholarship that's done on stuff like this. And so why do we feel the need to point this out, that Genesis was never intended to be a detailed scientific handbook describing how God created the universe? Because number one, that's true. And number two, that seems to be lost on a great many atheists. I'm glad it sounds like it's not lost on you. Great. But that's often what we hear, and we need to be able to confront that problem when we see it. Also, she has down here, imagine how confusing messages about gravity waves and dark matter might be to ancient Hebrew readers. Yes, let's hear what she has to say about that.
That's right, God was just being a considerate author for the ancient Hebrew readers, that's all. This kind of reminds me of a speech that Hitchens gave once where he talked about how it's estimated that humans have been on this earth for around 100,000 to 250,000 years. It's being debated, but he used 100,000 years because, for argument's sake, it's a smaller number. It's easier for people to understand. So let's just say we've been around here for 100,000 years. You know, we just went on pillaging, raping, murdering, thieving, just all kinds of violence, and only 2,000 years ago did God decide to do something about it. So, you know, since he wrote it to be so considerate for the ancient Hebrews, maybe by the time science has advanced to the point where humans are able to live on other planets, he'll give us another book explaining how the Earth actually is round. Better
by the way, so you probably couldn't see that. It was a cartoon that said something like, so let's see. So you thought I wandered the desert for 40 years without knowing that murder isn't okay. Let's continue.
Book explaining how the Earth actually is round. Better late than never, right?
Okay, so let's think about this. What is she saying? First of all, yes, God revealed truth within the cultural framework appropriate to the original readers. Yeah, it makes sense that if God is first giving revelation to ancient Hebrews, he's not going to give it in a way that requires them to understand things at a modern 21st century university level. He's going to give it to them in a way that they can understand. Why is that mock-worthy? I mean, I'm taking it. I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. You're like mocking it. I'm saying, yeah, what? That makes sense to me. And then second, it's not, yes, Hitchens did say that, and that is what we call a straw man. You'll recall that 2 videos ago, or maybe the last video that I did one of these, I pointed out that Hitchens often misunderstood what Christians were saying, particularly as it comes to morality. He misunderstood what Christians were saying in the moral argument almost every time it got brought up, even though he was repeatedly corrected on it. What are Christians actually saying? And in those same moral waters, when Hitchens characterizes it as though nobody ever knew that murder wasn't okay until the 10 Commandments came and God told them, and oh, thank God, now we know that certain things are right. No, the whole point, Christian theism has always said, no, God has written his law on your hearts. We know certain things are right and wrong. What happened on Mount Sinai is that, number one, God took ownership of that. God expressed that in some sense that that's his law, that you may already be aware of it, but this is my law. And there are some more specific laws that you're not aware of. And I'm your king now, and you're going to live according to this law. And if you don't, there are going to be consequences. There are going to be blessings, and there are going to be consequences based on this law code. It's not as though if we went and started a new civilization on some large mass of land somewhere, and we would start setting up laws. One of those would be a law against murder. Does that mean that we didn't know that murder was wrong when we arrived at the island? No, of course we know that it's wrong, but we would build laws and systems like that so that we could appropriately dole out punishments and rewards. That's just how that works. I don't know why this is a problem for anyone. So let's continue on and see what else she has to say.
It seems like religious people every year are getting more and more desperate. They staunchly oppose science up to a point, and then they jump ship and try to take it on as their own. A famous quote by Neil deGrasse.
Now, first of all, it's not the case that we every year take on or agree with science up to a point. We don't just oppose science when it's convenient. We just don't think science is the only way to gain knowledge. So if you're thinking about the cosmos, if you're thinking about the beginning of the universe, then it makes sense to pay attention to what science says and what physicists say up to the point where we're talking about the beginning. Beyond that, when we're talking about what existed sans the physical universe, what could serve as the cause of the physical universe coming into existence, you're never going to be able to know if you're relying on science. Now, I realize there are theoretical physicists and people like that. There are people at the intersection of philosophy and science, and they're doing that kind of work and making those speculations. And of course, multiverse theory itself is in part a way to explain how it is that life is so incredibly unlikely, and yet we have it, that our universe is the way it is. It's trying to increase the odds. But if you have a designer, then there's simply no problem. The designer designed it to be life permitting in that way. But if you're trying to figure out what caused the universe, even the multiverse, you're going to have to do something other than science, because science can only get you so far. And so as a result, what you need to do is we have these other ways of taking in knowledge and learning things. We have philosophy, history, personal experience. Personal experience is pretty powerful, and we have these other ways of thinking about it. For example, when we talk about morality, science really can't tell you everything you want to know about morality. Part of the reason for that is because it gets a bit philosophical. I mean, if we left it merely to the natural sciences to explain morality to us, then you would, of necessity, be left with subjective morality. Now, there are those people that go with what is called a non-natural moral realism, but their feet are firmly planted in midair. There simply is no grounding for objective morality. So if you're going to go with naturalism, you're left with some kind of a moral subjectivity, as we saw in the video with Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic and Matt Dillahunty. And you have a number of people who will happily grant this. Because no matter what you try to say, even if you try to base it in our shared desire for well-being or something like that, that still is subjective. We're still basing that on opinions. And what someone like Matt Dillahunty will wish to do with morality is they'll say something like, well, okay, it's in an ultimate sense, it may be subjective, but it's objective at the practical level because, like the game of chess, for instance, we made up the rules to the game of chess. So in that sense, it's ultimately subjective how you play chess. But within the structures that we've created now, there is an objective right and wrong move for chess. But understand, the only thing that really matters here is the ultimate sense when you're trying to figure out whether morality is subjective or objective. You can say it's objective, but it still isn't really, because we're really talking about the ultimate sense and whether it's objective or subjective ultimately. Because ultimately what we want to know is it the case that torturing a child just for the fun of it is really morally wrong in the same sense that 2 + 2 = 7 is mathematically wrong? There are objective things and there are subjective things. Objective things you can think of as matters of fact. Subjective things are matters of opinion, even if they're the opinions of an entire city, region, nation, or whatever else. For instance, right now where I live, it is illegal to buy and sell marijuana for recreational purposes. So this city has judged it wrong to buy and sell morality or whatever. But you can get on a plane and fly to Denver, Colorado, where it's my understanding that it is legal to buy and sell marijuana under certain circumstances for recreational purposes. You see, what has happened there is it's still up for opinion about whether a society should be doing this or not. It's just that it's no longer the opinions of an individual, it's the opinions of an entire group or a community of people. But it's still subjective. It's built on the subjective opinions of the lawmakers and citizens or whatever in that particular region or in our nation. So you see, it's still subjective. That's the only sense that really matters. Because if it were the case that everyone in the whole world thought it was okay to kill a certain color of person, would that then mean that it's okay because everyone agrees on it? Now you can roll your eyes and say, that's impractical. That would never happen. Lest I remind you of World War II, right? The fact of the matter is that this could happen. And if it did happen, would it make it okay or right? If it made it okay or right, for example, say, and I'm not the first to say this, that say that the Nazis had succeeded and either taken over the world or most of the world and convinced everyone or killed those that disagreed that it was okay to kill Jewish people. Would that then mean it was okay to kill Jewish people? Of course not. That's absurd. The idea is absurd, right? What we're saying there is it's wrong no matter what people think about it. It's objectively wrong. And naturalists can't get there. You can't get there through naturalism. And so as a result, if you believe that morality is objective, then you believe that there must be something else. And see, science can't help us there. It can get us so far, but then we have to rely on something else. We need another detector. One of my big objections to Matt Dillahunty is that he relies on some sort of a scientism, or at least a soft scientism. In fact, in many of his debates. It didn't come up in ours, but he'll say something like, some people will say that I'm not saying that that I do affirm scientism, but maybe I do. And what he's doing there is he's trying to say that before the Christian apologist gets the chance to say it, but then sort of waffle on it so that the door is still open for him to use it. But scientism is the view that you shouldn't believe something unless it's delivered to you by science. Of course, that statement itself can't be defended scientifically. It's self-referentially incoherent. And so as a result, what has happened is naturalists who think that we should either rely on science or something science-y have done themselves a real disservice in terms of really knowing all that they can know, justifiably can know. So let me give you an example. It's one I gave in my debate with Matt. So if let's say that you had a metal detector, and in the analogy, the metal detector represents science. And it's the best metal detector in the world. Every time it hovers over metal, it beeps and chirps. I mean, it's just the perfect metal detector. It's really good at what it's supposed to do, detect metal. But what if you then concluded, so we can't know whether there is sand or water or trees or air because this metal detector doesn't detect them? Well, that would be a huge problem, right? The huge problem is you need a different detector. It's not that there's no good reason to believe in those things. You're just using the wrong device. There are devices for these other things. And when we're talking about the physical universe, science is that metal detector that's really great at studying the physical universe. Science is great at studying the natural universe. But when we're talking about things that are not the natural universe, like whatever caused the physical universe, we must be talking about some other device. We're doing philosophy. We're using logic. We're looking at history. When we're doing historical events like the resurrection, we're using personal experience. These are all other devices that can be used in addition to science. And when you sort of dogmatically rely just on this science or something science-y, then you're going to shut yourself off to a great many conclusions that you could justifiably reach. And I would argue would give your life much more fulfillment. You'd have good answers that will be helpful and practical. But you shut yourself off to those things. And that doesn't seem very much like free thinking to me.
deGrasse Tyson said that every great scientific truth goes through 3 phases. First, people deny it. Second, they say it conflicts with the Bible. Third, they say they've known it all along. So long story short.
Okay, so she points to Neil deGrasse Tyson and he says this about what happens when people hear a new scientific discovery. I have a principle that you will have heard me say at least a couple of times if you've listened to all these response videos. And that principle is whenever your interlocutor, whenever the person you're having the discussion with, brings up something to which you can meaningfully say, so what? And it does not weaken your argument or strengthen theirs, then they have a bad argument. She's not even making an argument, really. She's just quoting someone, but she's quoting that someone to lend support to the overall point that she wants to make about how silly this whole thing is. But the reality is, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, even if I don't know that statement that Neil deGrasse Tyson makes is true, but even if it is true, so what? Does that help your point? It's certainly not what's going on here. Christians have not, it's not like Christians were saying that God didn't begin, there was no beginning for the universe, and now all of a sudden that science has discovered it, they're saying, oh yeah, well I guess there was, and our Bible said it all along. No. Classical Christian theism has always said that there is a cosmic beginning. And guess what? Science now has come around to this. That is confirmatory of at least that portion of our belief system. We're not adapting to the belief system. The belief system has arrived at something that we were saying all along. So it's completely the other way around, backwards. But even when we just want to go with what Neil deGrasse Tyson says, the answer is, so what?
Anything and everything can be used by religious people as evidence for God, and the Big Bang is no exception to that rule.
And the answer that I would give here is yes. Every physical object and concept in the universe can be used as a part of an argument for the existence of God. That's true. In fact, you think you're saying it in a silly way here, but famous Christian thinkers have said things very similar. Whether you're talking about pigs or whether you're talking about auto mechanics, if you talk about anything for long enough, you can get back to God. What she thinks is a mockery is actually a very relevant and meaningful point. It's why it is the case that while we often hear from skeptics that it's as though you Christians, as science discovers more and closes the holes in the gaps in our knowledge, that you have to push yourself further and further back in the corner and your claims become more and more limited because you shove God into those gaps that haven't been explained yet. In reality, what's going on is, as science has discovered more, as our thought and human thought and discoveries continue to be amassed, skeptics have to raise the bar higher and higher and higher to overcome these theistic arguments. In this case, it couldn't be more obvious. If we're talking about a cosmic beginning, and many physicists are thinking there is one, and that is exactly what Christian claims were all the time, then you are having to raise the bar, not us. So, or lower the bar, raise the bar, whatever, you get the point. Now, in wrapping all of this up, I just want to say again that I actually really like this person. I think she's a nice person. I think I've seen another video where she was actually saying something somewhat charitable to Ray Comfort or someone like that. I think I could be thinking of someone else. But I just want to point out here that if this is the sort of thing that some people are getting, notice how someone who doesn't really know much about worldview evaluation would hear a video like this and find it comforting. If they have just arrived at atheism, or they're thinking atheism might be true, whether that's because of evidential reasons or because of something they want to do with their life that they don't think they can do, some practice they want to be involved in that is not biblically allowable. Now, remember, I'm not saying that's always the case. I don't know. I think it is for some people. I think for some people, they really just don't believe. But for someone who doesn't know all these tools and principles of worldview analysis, something like this is going to be comforting. And they're going to think, yeah, obviously it is ridiculous. But as you can see, when you break these things down, the very things she's mocking, I think she thinks that the Christian would agree with her that it would be silly to think that God exists because her dog is able to defecate. But in actuality, even that cannot be explained without Christian theism. I will be the stereotype that she is looking for. I'll be her caricature, because I think that most of what she says in mockery actually turns out to be true. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope that JaclynGlenn sees it. I hope she comes to Christ. And I hope you watch next time. If you'd like to support what we're doing here, then you can click in the upper right-hand corner of the video screen, and you can give to us and support what we're doing at patreon.com/TrinityRadio. Please subscribe to the channel at, youtube.com/BraxtonHunter. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time on Trinity Radio.